Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to our friends and colleagues in Brazil and Europe, and to anyone that is who is located east of California. So my name is Daniele Zaccaria, and I'm an agriculture water management specialist with the University of California, Davis. So in the next couple of hours, I'll be moderating this webinar of today, which is on California agriculture. And the webinar will feature speakers and presentation who will talk about the major crop and production areas in California. Before giving the floor to our excellent speakers of today, I'd like to provide some context of California agriculture. And I'm going to open my presentation, which is a few slides. Just to give you some context and some idea, California agriculture is a huge industry and generates every year about $50 billion. And the state is very diversified in terms of weather and soil and crops, and we produce almost 500 crops throughout the state. You see the map on your right-hand side of the slide. You can see the major agricultural production area highlighted in different colors. You can see that the agricultural production is mainly done in the Sacramento Valley and the San Joaquin Valley, who are highlighted in green and yellow, and together they compose what we call the Central Valley of California. Then the orange area is the Central Coast, and then we have the low desert region. So the state, as I was telling you, produce a lot of crops, and we have about 2.5 million hectares of annual crops and 1.3 million hectares of orchards and vineyards. And in this table here, I show the major crops and cash income generated by the different crops and commodity group for the crop season of 2017. As you can see here, fruit and nut crops generate about 40% of the total cash income of California agriculture, and that corresponds to about $21 billion. And then we have vegetable crops and field crops and all the other crops. So we selected the speakers of today based on the relevance, the economic relevance of the different crop categories and the different production area. So our speakers today and the subject that they are going to present on are Mae Culumber is the first speaker, and she is a nut crop farm advisor for the San Joaquin Valley, and she's going to present on nut crop production in her areas of competence. A second speaker is Andre Vizcarro, who is a berry and vegetable farm advisor in the central coast of California. So he's going to present about berry and vegetable crop production. The third speaker is Can Kurterol, who is a viticultural specialist at the University of California, Davis, and he's going to provide information about the wine and table grape production in California. The fourth speaker is Khaled Bali, and he's going to present about field crop production in the low desert region. Khaled Bali is an irrigation specialist at Kearney, University of California, Kearney Agriculture and Research and Extension Center. And the final presenter is Ben Faber, who is a subtropical crop advisor in the central coast of California, and he's going to talk about the production of subtropical crops in California. So just to give you some more information, all the speakers belong to the University of California Cooperative Extension, who is a network, a network of researchers and education that work together to provide science-based answer for solving economic, agriculture, natural resource, and food security answer for California population. In this map here, you see some numbers and some location. So the University of California Cooperative Extension Network is composed by 130 cooperative extension specialists that are based at 4 campuses. In total, we are 200 locally based cooperative extension farm advisors and specialists throughout the state of California. And some of us are located on campus, some of us are located at the different county offices throughout California. And we also have 9 research and extension centers throughout the state. So without taking any more time to the speaker, I'll give the floor to the first speaker, who is Mae Culumber, and he's going to talk about nut crop production in the San Joaquin Valley. Mae, I think you have the floor.
Okay. Sorry, let me just share my screen. Okay, good morning. As Daniele said, thank you for the introduction. I'm a nut crop advisor. I'm based out of Fresno County, which is in the southern San Joaquin Valley of California. I provide research and I provide outreach education to our grower community, and I work with farmers one-on-one to understand their challenges that they face on a daily basis, and to conduct trials, mainly in the areas of irrigation system management and tree nutrition, to develop improvements in production practices. Nut crops are a very important part of the agricultural economy in California, as Daniele noted. Almonds, walnuts, and pistachios received a combined $9 billion in cash receipts in 2018. This explosive increase in value in recent years can largely be attributed to significant changes that we've seen in crop varieties, rootstocks, planting densities, pruning, canopy management, various farming practices, and improvements in irrigation technology, which has led to greater yields, better quality in recent years. But there are also many production challenges facing growers. Today, I'm going to highlight a few examples of those that are bolded in this list. Growers, there's several examples I'll show you of problems from variability in climate that we've experienced this year, increasing soil and water salinity problems across the region. There's also shortages of bees with particular importance in almonds. We often see limb, trunk, root, and foliar diseases. There's increasing problems with weed resistance, pests. Some of the major players are navel orangeworm in all 3 of those crops. And then we see a lot of cotyledon moth and huskfly in walnuts. Labor, there's increasing costs and perennial shortages for labor. And then lastly, 2 of the most important things, or the problem of most significance is the problem with our water supply. We are seeing large overdrafts in our groundwater, and surface water supplies are becoming increasingly limited. And so irrigation scheduling with precision is of utmost importance now. So water supply, as I mentioned, is by far the biggest challenge facing California agricultural growing community in the coming decades. And pumping has greatly reduced the groundwater levels. It's also led to increased seawater intrusion and degraded the water quality in many areas. So in response to this, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was initiated in 2014 to stop these overdrafts and increase the regulation of water use, and with particular interest to areas of high priority. And so if you look at this map on the right of California, you see that the different areas of different basins are outlined. And those that are outlined in red are considered of critical importance for overdraft. So this is where we're seeing the most severe shortages. Underneath that, with the different shades of green, also signifies the importance of different counties in terms of their per farm annual sales. So you can see that in a lot of the areas where that are of most economic importance are also in areas where we have this critical overdraft. So this could result in between 500,000 and 780,000 acres could be fallowed in order to achieve the goal of naturally refilling these aquifers. So in order to survive these water shortages, farmers are going to need to learn how to adapt. So this is a complex problem, but some actions, including efforts to recharge aquifers during large precipitation events, and the use of surface water when available from rivers, or even can naturally refill the aquifers, and then injection into the ground is another option. We're facing the possibility of having to fallow land, as I mentioned. Water trading markets are developing. And then growers may need to adopt innovations like regulated deficit irrigation in their practices. It's very important to work to improve the distribution uniformity and perform routine maintenance in irrigation systems. And then I'll talk a little bit later about approaches that growers are taking to improve their water budgeting and adopt water-saving irrigation technologies. Okay, so the almond market, or the almond industry in California, has about 1.5 million acres, and that's up 10%. Those are numbers as of 2019, which is up 10% from 2018 numbers. And most of those hectares, most of those acres are bearing age. The total production in 2019 was over 2.55 billion pounds, and is forecasted to shatter that record with 3 billion pounds in 2020. In light of the COVID-19 situation that we're facing, there have been some changes with the domestic and export markets, but shipments are actually up over 6% domestically for this year to date. And export markets are up 5% as well. So almonds are faring well despite the current crisis. So climate variability sometimes can cause significant problems in all of the nut crops. This is an almond orchard, and sometimes we see problems at bloom, which will result in far less crop to set. I visited many farms this spring in California with sparse bloom and sparse nut set, and oftentimes we think these problems can be traced back to unusual weather patterns events from the previous year. 2019 was a very big rain year in California, particularly in May in the southern San Joaquin Valley. We saw record levels of precipitation, and we think that physiologically this may have caused some problems with water stress during bud differentiation in almonds, which could have led to negative impacts on bloom in 2020. Okay, other problems that we see are root infections and diseases, and these are also commonly observed problems following wet springs. So other sources of this disease can come from surface and water sources that can carry the pathogens. But again, irrigation system problems, potentially leaks, and then other problems with scheduling can also contribute to these issues. And then infiltration is another problem that needs to be addressed as well. Okay, water penetration problems have become increasingly common in the Central Valley of California. So over 100 years of intensive farming has resulted in water penetration problems, and there are several potential causes of this issue, including compaction from repeated cultivation and the movement of heavy machinery across the orchard floor, as well as there can be natural hard pans in the soil layers. And then as I mentioned earlier, with increasing problems with soil and water quality issues, we're increasingly seeing chemically induced surface crusting, which can also be a source of the problem. Okay, moving on to pistachios. The pistachio industry, like almonds, has been growing rapidly in recent decades. In 2019, there were over 393,000 acres. This is up 11% from 2018. Of that area, most of this is of bearing age. Generally, that would be greater than 7 to 8 years old. These pistachio trees reach their full bearing age at approximately 15 years. 105,000 acres of those are non-bearing and newly planted. The total production in 2019, which was considered to be an off year, was over 370,000 tons, which would be the equivalent of 2,500 pounds per bearing acre. Our domestic markets shipments were around 69,000 tons from this year to date, which has been similar to levels seen in 2019, but the export market shipments are considerably down from last year. Oh, and I forgot to mention, just looking at the map, just the distribution of that acreage. The majority of those acres are found in the southern central area of the San Joaquin Valley. And as I mentioned earlier on the map, you might remember that these are some of these critical overdraft areas. And so as we see those problems develop, we are seeing increases in acreage as we go further north through California. Okay, just to touch on a few of the climate impacts that we've noticed in pistachio. We had a very unusual year with bud break this year in pistachio. This is our current understanding of why bud break, or why these issues happen. Usually we would associate this with not accumulating enough chill. So chill has been recognized as something very important in pistachio. On the far right corner, on the far right side of this table, you can see what over the past 6 years or so, what the accumulated chill hours would be. So in our area in 2019 and 20, we were more than adequate with chill hours, but still at bloom break, we were seeing this very erratic patterns of a lack of leafing out and sometimes a lack of flowering in several areas. But when looking at the growing degree days, so the temperatures as things heat up, the pistachios require heat, we experienced very cool temperatures during bud break. So the continuous rain, cool air, and cool soil temperatures, we believe may have prevented a temperature gradient between the roots and the scion, the budded cultivar. So preventing a gradient to translocate carbohydrates that are needed for bud break. So the trees did not have enough energy they needed to produce buds at bud break. So other production challenges, the rapid expansion of pistachio has shown decreasing availability of the quality and quantity of water problems. And so this comes with the increased incidence of salinity problems in the valley. Pistachios, though considered very salt tolerant, they still have their limits. And the accumulation of sodium, chloride, and boron, and additionally, the accumulation of high levels of bicarbonates can also contribute to nutrient deficiencies, soil sealing, as I mentioned earlier, so reduced infiltration, and irrigation system clogging. So these conditions create what we call osmotic stress in young developing trees, which can eventually lead to problems with specific ion toxicity, which can be observed with necrotic leaves. So the salt accumulation becomes so much that it is assimilated through the trunk and into the canopy scaffolds of the trees, and will express itself through the leaves. And so when we have these necrotic leaves, we have very reduced photosynthetic capacity to produce the reserves that are needed for the development of the nuts in that given season. Okay, so in order to look at this question of how much is salinity impacting the pistachio industry. Dr. Daniele Zachariah, our host, started a 4-year study to understand the performance of pistachio trees in salt-affected areas, and he confirmed that salt-stressed trees do have lower yields. So you can see yield is expressed in the table in this line. So as we had increasing salinity in the soil, we had decreasing yield, but also another factor of increasing salinity is decreasing water use. So this is very important information that will be needed to guide decisions in the future about where to plant pistachios, and to guide irrigation management decisions in salt-affected areas to attain the best water use efficiency possible. Okay, just a few words about walnuts. So the walnuts have fallen behind other major nut crops in terms of production and value. It is still a major player on the world stage of production. There are over 430,000 acres of walnuts, and the majority of which are in the bearing years of production. In 2019, the total production was over 630,000 tons. The domestic markets are down a little bit this year compared to the previous year, in both domestic and international exports. Similar production challenges can be found in walnuts in comparison to almond and pistachio with regard to irrigation. So there's a disease known as lethal paradox canker. This image on the right shows a tree that is believed to be suffering from the disease. It's characterized by a bleeding bark cankers that originate below the soil surface, and they exude this black gooey substance up and around the trunk. And usually when the tree starts to suffer from this, they will die within 1 to 2 years. But the lethal paradox canker, it's thought to be originated from a disease, but a causal microorganism has never been identified. And then also this disease is commonly associated with excessive soil moisture. So this may point to an abiotic rather than a biotic source for this disorder. So it's not uncommon for growers to use evapotranspiration with adjusted crop coefficient values to schedule irrigation. And so what this graph is showing is that if a grower were to follow irrigation according to ET with an applied crop coefficient for walnut, this would be the amount of cumulative applied water over the course of the growing season. So this is based on some actual data collected in walnut orchards in 2016 by Ken Shekel and others. So, but applying this ET rate with a crop coefficient is just a broad estimation of what actual crop needs are. What the actual crop needs are for water. And so it's going to be very important to use other tools to increase the precision for meeting water tree requirements. So one important finding from research in the last decade or so in tree crops has been that delayed irrigation may be the best approach to managing disease without compromising yield. So when we think about, I seem to be having trouble advancing the slide. So when we think about how much irrigation is needed to supply the ET for tree crops, we have to consider also the amount of water that's provided to the trees in the form of precipitation and groundwater storage, depending on soil texture. So areas in the further north in California, almost 20% of water needs could be met just by precipitation alone. But it's a much different situation in the southern San Joaquin, where we have the majority of our tree crops growing. So so with so much regional variability, It's difficult to assume that it's a one-size-fits-all recommendation for irrigation management for nut crops. So considering that, when we work with growers to improve their irrigation management, we want them to consider what methods can they use to make the best informed and effective water management decisions in nut crops. And a combination of at least two methods is what's currently recommended to improve water budgeting for how much water to apply and when. Okay, so in coordination with those observations, we recommend the use of online decision support tools to help collate the information to help guide irrigation scheduling decisions. Finally, a lot of increasing technologies are becoming readily available that can quantify the spatial variability needed to help with irrigation system design and scheduling and to increase water use efficiency across the entire field. So remotely sensed information can give a good indication of variation across the orchard. So those tools are also potentially very useful as well. So just to give you a little background on soil moisture sensing, this is a concept that allows you to assume that we can estimate what the ET is and water stress with the high frequency soil moisture monitoring. So continuous soil moisture monitoring. So being familiar with how trees utilize soil moisture through the season can help with meeting tree water requirements at critical times to avoid water stress. Understanding the graphs can help you understand when is the best timing. So in this graph, this staircase effect shows when the tree is drawing the most water during the daytime, and then when it steps, that would be during the nighttime. And then as the water level begins to decline and then flatten out, this would be indicative of the onset of crop water stress. Now, this is just a soil profile for one depth in the soil, but we can use this. We can use these indicators at multiple depths through the entire root zone of the tree to understand how soil moisture is being drawn down in between irrigation sets. Tree sensors, in recent years, the tree sensor technology has greatly improved and provided continuous plant water status that can be used to guide irrigation timing decisions. We are currently using these technologies in our trials to track stress responses to scheduled irrigations. The dendrometers on the far right measure the amount of that trees, the trunks shrink and swell within a given day, and the more difference between shrink and swell diameter in the tree indicates an increased demand in water. Another tool uses a sensor that's drilled into the tree, and it's placed right at the interface of the water containing tissues in the tree, and the sensor contains a membrane permeable only to water. So when the tree is saturated and it's not thirsty, water seeps through the membrane into the sensor by osmosis. When the tree is dry, water is drawn from the membrane with increasing tension and gives us an interpretation in terms of bars of pressure. And so we're studying this closely to see how this compares with some of our traditional on the ground measurements of monitoring plant water status in orchards. And then, as I mentioned before, in recent years, these plant and soil-based methods, the plant and soil-based methods that I just mentioned are good tools, but it's not always certain that that information is applicable to conditions experienced by trees across the entire orchard. So satellite or aerial management of actual ET is an approach being used by researchers and many growers to understand the spatial variability in the growing environment across the entire orchard area. The objective for now is for us to correlate the remote and ground sensing methods of assessing stress and using this information to come up with new strategies to optimize irrigation scheduling. So looking into the future, our vision is to increase the efficiency of irrigation systems and scheduling, and recognize that these systems have improved greatly in recent years, but more work is needed to be done to meet the water supply challenges of the present and future in California. We need to do continued work to correlate those variously remotely and proximately sensed methods of assessing stress and use this information to optimize irrigation scheduling. And then we need to work to validate and optimize technology to provide growers with reliable methods to measure the actual water use of orchards and improve the water use efficiency and overall orchard health. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mae, for your excellent presentation. You can probably stop sharing. Okay, super. Our next presenter is Andre Biscaro, who is a berry and vegetable crop farm advisor in the Central Coast of California, and he's going to present about berry and vegetable crop production. Andre, you can start.
Okay, Daniele. So I still cannot share my presentation. I can share other files. So, and I apologize for the technical difficulties, but let's just pass it to Khan, and then I'll try after him again.
Okay, so Khan Kurterol is going to present next. Khan is a viticulture specialist with the University of California, and he's going to talk about grape production, both wine grapes and table grapes in California. Khan, the floor is yours.
Okay. How's my voice? Good?
Good.
Good.
Okay. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Like Daniele said, my name is Khan. I'm the CE specialist for viticulture. I cover the whole state of California. I work with wine grapes, table grapes, and everything else in between. So I will go through some of the production challenges that we're facing, and these challenges are not unique just to wine or table grapes, as we're all in the same industry suffering from similar problems. There's a lot of information on grapevines in California for up-to-date California grape acreage divided by a commodity such as wine grapes, which makes majority of our acreage. Table grapes and raisin grapes, you can go to the National Ag Statistics website, which is the first link here. Currently, we are looking at about 500,000 hectares of total grape acreage. About half of that is going to be wine grapes. About 50,000 hectares of raisin grapes, and about 17,000 hectares of table grapes. As far as other reporting concerns that we have, these numbers are tabulated yearly, which I will show you. The one that people wait for the most is the grape crush report. How many grapes were crushed, what they were paid per ton, etc. And then individually on a county basis, people can go to Ag Commissioner websites to get these informations. The most up-to-date information is done through an industry symposium called the Unified Symposium in California, which is usually in late January, and it is held in Sacramento, where people will meet and discuss the upcoming year. For up-to-date information, we have published a new book. This is online and free that can be approached. through a website. It's called the Wine Grapes of UC Davis. It's an online book. You can read the origin of the foundation plant services, where the actual germplasm is kept and how they are preserved. Moving on, our industry, the grapevine industry, has a total impact of $161 billion. This is the impact of California grapevine industries. This includes table grapes, raisin grapes, wine, and of course the associated factors that come with it. And all the grapes that are grown in California are divided into grape pricing districts. And these grape pricing districts are divided into 17 districts, starting from Northern California, in the coastal areas, Mendocino, Lake, Sonoma, Napa, and Marin counties. And this is where a lot of people are able to add value to grapes with wine grape marketing with wine. In addition, the majority of the production area is in the San Joaquin Valley, very much like Mae Culumber presented. The 7 counties of San Joaquin Valley, which is districts 14, 13, 12, will make about 70% of the crush for wine grapes. Table grapes are also grown in this crush district, districts 13 and 14, and 100% of the value from table grapes is realized from here. Raisin grapes, on the other hand, are only localized to crush district 13, which is Fresno and Madera counties. As this industry is reinventing itself with mechanization, as I will show you in a little bit, with a new variety called Supreme, things are certainly changing. The coastal areas in the central portion of California, which is highlighted in District 6 and District 7 and District 8, are only wine grape cultivars with very little, if any, table grapes growing in the inland areas of Monterey County. The wine growing regions are separate from the pricing districts. These are divided into geographic regions such as North Coast, Central Coast, Inland Valleys, Sierra Foothills, Southern California, and other California. As you can see, the largest wine growing region we have is the Central Valley. It goes from Bakersfield, almost close to Los Angeles, almost to the Oregon border. This is the combination of Sacramento Valley and the San Joaquin Valley. And this is where about 70% of the grapes in California will be planted and grown, and where majority of the business is. About 50% of the wine grape crush is within a 60-mile radius of Fresno County, right here. And then the southern tip of San Joaquin Valley is where all the table grape and raisin grape production happens. Looking at the trends in grapes crushed, these are, I divided these into white wine, red wine, table grapes, and raisin grapes. Grapes that are not picked to be marketed as table grapes or raisin grapes also go into the wine making, although at a lower price. They will all compromise the harvest. So these are in thousands of tons. So in an average year, we will grow about 4 million tons of grapes that we will use to make wine. So majority of this, the trend has been shifting. This trend started happening right around 2013. We started, using raisin grapes to make wine. And they're not going into raisin grape production either. The difference between 2013 and 2014 using the raisin grapes for crush is that we started importing grapes or finished wine for bulk wine from the southern hemisphere, because the cost of growing raisin grapes is too much. So as you can see, we have a nice split between white wine grapes and red wine grapes and what we crush. So we're mainly a red wine grape growing country at this point because of the price point the growers will get. The table grapes that are not picked are called tailings, and these will be also used for wine grape making to make the bulk. The grape tonnage, as Mae mentioned earlier, it's variable. This is dependent on the weather and the harvest conditions. Slowly but surely, we have moved from 3 million tons of grapes used for making wine grapes to almost 4.3 million tons of grapes. And this has become a concern, and I will talk about that a little bit. Table grape tonnage has also decreased as we have moved our production to southern hemisphere. And as I mentioned earlier, raisin grape acreage has gone from roughly about 100,000 hectares to roughly about 50,000 hectares as that production has moved to the country of Turkey. Looking at the leading grape varieties that we use in California, we're mainly focusing on these top 5 varieties. So we're not very diverse. We mainly grow Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Zinfandel, Pinot Noir, French Colombard, some Merlot, some Pinot Gris, and then we have an industrial variety named Ruby Red. The other varieties will only make up about a quarter of the tonnage. So we used to be mainly a Chardonnay growing region, but certainly but surely we're moving more towards a red wine grape making section. Looking at this as the trends are changing, this is the 2019 Grape Crush Report, where we have the most up-to-date data. Unfortunately, we do not have the same type of statistics for table grapes. They're not necessarily broken down by cultivars, because a lot of the cultivars are proprietary to the growers. They just report a final number. Looking at this, the amount of tons produced from year to year, and then the prices that are paid per ton. Majority of the grapes are, roughly making about between $600 to $800 a ton in average. If you look at the overall trend from year to year, there's a little bit of a change in prices. The prices are moving in the positive direction for varieties that are in trend, that the market is willing to bear. For example, red wine grape prices have increased roughly about 5% over the course of the year. White wine prices have increased about 8% year on year. But some varieties, the prices are decreasing, such as Petit Syrah, Pinot Noir, and Zinfandel. On the white wine side, Riesling and Pinot Gris is not garnering that much attention from the marketplace. As an example, if you look at this, I just picked a district that's up and coming. This is the Temecula area. The area, this is by Los Angeles, San Diego area. Red wine grapes are pulling in roughly about $1,600 a ton. White wine grapes are pulling about $1,700 a ton. Overall, on the average, grapes are bringing in about $1,700 a ton here, and you can see the prices are fairly stable between red and white here. But as you can see, the lack of diversity in white wine grapes, they are much less than in the red wine grapes, as there are more choices in red wine grapes in a lot of the regions in California. If we were to compare district average prices, so for example, there's differences in Napa Valley, Sonoma County, and Sonoma Coast. Red wine grapes will bring almost up to $7,000 a ton in Napa Valley. White wine grapes are roughly about $3,000 a ton. Comparatively, Sonoma County, roughly about $3,000 a ton. what we say north coast, further up northern and inland and Sonoma County, they're only about $2,000 a ton. And this is not by design. This is all based on the climatic conditions that these grapes grown in due to the diurnal variations between these regions and how the public perceives the quality of grapes or wines that might be coming from these regions. Furthermore, as you go inland, where a majority of the grapes are produced, let's take a look at southern interior valleys, where 70% of the production is happening. The per ton price in this case drops down to about $400, almost down to $300 a ton, whether it's red or white wine grapes. So this is a far different scenario than you would see on the coastal regions, where they might get up to $7,000 a ton. But a majority of where production happens, grapes are only bringing in about $300 to $350 a ton. Looking at it, this is the concern. One of the production challenges we will see. This is the number of wine grapes sold as cuttings to growers from the nurseries. So growers bought 22 million grapevines in 2018, and they planted 22 million grapevines to replace aging vineyards. Okay, so we roughly have about 1,400 vines to the hectare. Okay, so you can see the number of changes per hectare that's being replanted in California. There's a huge preference towards reds. 70% of the new plantings are red wine grapes. 31% of them are white, and an overall preference given to Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir in the wine grape side. In white grape side, it's mainly going to be a Chardonnay and a Sauvignon Blanc. The rest of them are going to be blenders and florals, as we would call. So not a huge preference for diversity in the industry as a whole. So our typical characteristics in vineyard operations, essentially all our vineyards, except for a few regions or very few isolated places, are all irrigated. And the majority of these vineyards are micro-irrigated with drip irrigation. So overall, we will use about 1.5 megaliters per hectare to irrigate vineyards. And these vineyards are very heavily dependent on hand labor, meaning that other than harvest, everything else is done by hand. And there's a big shift in consolidation in vineyards in California. A lot of families are getting out. There's a lot of consolidation. They're being bought by industrial concerns, making the farming a little bit more challenging with farm labor contractors. We have a lot of invasive species because we are a rural industry. We are prone to imported diseases, and we are also prone to viral diseases that might be spread by imported vectors, such as grapevine mealybug. Due to the problems in asexual propagation, we might also be suspect or susceptible to trunk diseases. We also have problems with transportation costs to markets. A lot of table grapes are kept in cold storage, and they will be transported across the country and overseas. These transportation costs, with the addition of labor, is a concern. And a majority of the labor operations costs are dealing with in-season practices of the grapevine management. And change is slow, and it may be slow because we are a traditional industry, and there's a lot of tradition in growing grapes, so change can be rather slow. So as changes are slow, since we lack the labor to manage these 500,000 hectares of grapevines, there's driving factors for mechanization and mechanical management in grapevines. The number one challenge we have is timeliness of cultural practices. Due to the consolidation in the industry, average vineyard sizes are approaching 100 hectares. So you can imagine what kind of a crew size you need to do a pass, a cultural practice pass in this vineyard. So it's not possible, even with 100 people, to do everything in like 1 or 2 days. The other problem is that we're lacking a willing labor force, because cost of labor has steadily increased to about $15 an hour, and probably more. Even at that price, we cannot find people that are willing to work in our vineyards, because they are associated with a quality of life problem. They do not want to work in vineyards because we are not close to our population centers. They have to travel to vineyards to work, and then travel back home. So it doesn't make for a very good life. There's also the land availability and cost to manage vineyards effectively, because there's a lot of foreign competition for table grapes, wine grapes that might be coming in, not so much with raisin grapes. So these are all factors driving the growers towards mechanizing their operations. As we move on, one of the largest challenges we have is to be more specific in managing the vineyards spatially, like Mae said. Spatial application of water in vineyards might not be as critical, because grapes are very efficient users of water. What we do is we're increasing the resolution for measurement and treatment, almost treating each vine individually. So presently, we're managing each block of vineyards uniformly. This includes bulk or composite vine and soil sampling. Some growers will do zone vineyard and soil management, which means that they will sample the vineyard, divide it into management zones, and try to manage it in this manner differentially. The future approach will include fine grid sampling or sensing and scanning in vineyards, trying to increase the resolution of measurement and treatment. I divided the commodities into 3. We have wine, raisin, and table grape vineyards. We can do all practices by machine due to our lack of labor in this country that wants to work in our vineyards. Wine grapes, 90% of them are harvested by machine. Raisin grapes, about 35% of them are harvested by machine. When it comes to other practices such as pruning, leaf removal, shoot removal, fruit removal to manage the crop load, there's differing abilities to mechanize these practices. In wine grapes, we can do a lot more compared to other types of grapes, because the fruit itself goes into a bin to be crushed. We do not care how it looks to the consumer. However, table grapes, the grapes has to be attractive to the consumer, so there is no mechanical harvesting done. Some mechanical pruning before the vineyard starts growing. Leaf removal can also be done mechanically, but other practices are not even considered. When it comes to wine grapes, we can do a lot more practices, such as pre-pruning or final pruning. Leaf removal, about half our surface area is done by machines, so on and so forth. Of course, grapevines are trellised, as you all know. There's a great diversity of trellises. I tried to summarize what we have in California for all the commodities that we have, such as table grapes, wine grapes, and raisin types of grapes. So if you look at them, majority of our acreage will be some type of a sprawl. I'll have pictures of these. So California sprawl is adapted to wine grape and raisin grape types. Vertically shoot position trellises, these are adapted to wine grapes only. Quadrilateral trellises, these are adapted to wine and table grape. Single high wire, this will be adapted to wine and raisin grapes. Head trained only for wine grapes. As you can see, our biggest problem is lack of available labor. In this case, these are the practices we can do by machine. The wine and raisin grapes, they can be pre-pruned, final pruned, shoot thinning, leaf removal, berry and cluster thinning, trunk suckering, harvest. These can be done by a machine with some difficulty. When we come to quadrilateral trellises, the quadrilateral trellises are adapted to wine and table grape types. A lot of the practices can be done by machine, but in table grapes, it's very difficult to harvest them by machine. When we come to wine and raisin grapes with single high wire trellises, essentially everything can be done by machine without a single human touching it, and this is the majority of the new vineyards that are being planted. The high production systems, I'll go through the single high wire system and then a high quadrilateral system. Single high wire system is a single canopy. This is non-shoot position. You have about 35% exposed leaf area. This can get into production in about 18 months. 11 to 24 tons to the acre, so it's moderately productive. High quadrilateral system, 68-inch tall canopy. This is a divided canopy. It is also not shoot position, about 70% of exposed leaf area. This can also get into production in about 18 months. It's very productive. And this is how they look. The single high wire system, which is on your left, is just a grapevine trunk that's grown to about 170 centimeters above the vineyard floor, and then you just establish a cordon on this wire. In this system, all you have to do is prune the top of these shoots with a machine, and it goes very well, and it can be harvested by a machine. However, this type does not lend itself to a table grape production. Quadrilateral, on the other hand, yes.
You have 4 more minutes, okay?
Yeah, I'm going fast.
All right.
Quadrilateral system is a split canopy system. It's split by about 60 centimeters. A lot of the practices can go by a machine in this case as well. However, we have a lot of desirable aspects at our harvest. Number one is being uniformly ripe fruit, but everybody gets paid by the tons per acre, so yield is paramount in any commodity that we work with. We have lots of equipment available for pruners, 2 types, pre-pruners and combination pruners. As you all look at the mechanical pruning, you can attempt to simulate hand pruning with severe pruning, or you can do a light pruning with a minimal pruning. But as you do a lighter pruning, you will have an increasing disease pressure from the old parts of the vine. As you know, our other problem we're facing is it's getting warmer. Climate change is an issue. We have significantly warmed up in California. We're in a hot climate growing region now, almost. And as we are warmed up, surprisingly to us, the quality of the grapes we grow increased. And the shift in coastal California is that we have little to no cloud cover with intermittent heat spikes, and there's no appreciable increase in precipitation supply. And with this, we tried to come up with more interesting trellises, so on and so forth. However, as you space them northwest, southeast, they are more exposed to the sun, which did not work. So we changed the row direction to about almost an east-west to more uniformly distribute the heat in this case. And the consequences of these high temperatures is that, number one is yield loss. As vapor pressure deficit increases, we see an increase in evapotranspiration. Water requirements under heat stress are also increased. And then working on mitigating heat spikes involves shading these canopies with different type of shade nets, and then this can also hurt a lot of the production parameters. We evaluated these, and then you can see the different type of sunburns in these grapes. What we want to avoid is pictures 3 and 4 here, which is becoming more and more common. And then if you are able to get on about 670 millimeters of water on these grapes, I'm sorry, about 131 millimeters of water on these grapes, they seem to be doing fine. So the exposure damage in this case looks like this. Even if we were to double the amount of water that we applied onto them, it is not as effective as shading them. So you can see the difference in shaded grapes, number of clusters with damage versus exposed, even with the double the amount of irrigation that we apply. So this is very common both in wine and table grapes. So we have to come up with a solution rather fast, rather than just trying to shade the grapevines. So with that, field studies are needed with a lot of these. Doubling the irrigation may have some mild beneficial effects for climate change, lowering berry temperature, avoiding berry dehydration, but might not be justified due to logistics or little gain. Shading does have a positive effect, retention of grape berry skin compounds. However, we are thinking that we need a better research focus about the detrimental effects of all these things that I talked about, such as drought and prolonged heat wave events. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and then I will be around the whole day to answer any questions I have. Did I stop sharing my screen?
Yes, thank you, Khan, for your presentation. And we'll try to give the floor to Andre Biscaro now, who's going to talk about berries and vegetable crop production in Southern California. Andre?
Hello, Daniele.
Yes.
I still can't share my presentation, even after doing the test with Rogers. So I'll just present as the last speaker and have Rogers passing my slides. I apologize again for that.
All right. Okay. So technical problems will change the order of presentation. Is Ben Faber ready for his presentation? Ben?
Yes, here I come.
All right. Ben is a subtropical farm advisor in Ventura County, and he's going to present about California as the land of subtropical crops. Ben, the floor is yours.
Tick tock, tick tock, tick. Okay. So my name's Ben Faber. I'm a farm advisor along the coast here in California. I've been asked to talk about subtropical fruit trees. And I mean, that's like talking about everything that's grown in Southern California. We grow babaco, banana, feijoa, guava, lychee, longan, jackfruit, coffee, tea, macadamias, mango, papaya, sapote, starfruit, olive, cherimoyas. And I also throw in things like strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries, because it's really the climate that permits the production that we have here. These are small farms in general, although we've got some very, very large farms that are in the Central Valley. So we're growing a half hectare of star fruit to 5,000 hectares of a certain mandarin variety in the Central Valley. So there's a lot of variety we have here. So it's Mae did a nice overview of the irrigation that is done in the state. What we see here is a Mediterranean climate. So this is the Great Central Valley, which is comprised of the Sacramento Valley and the San Joaquin Valley. This is where the bulk of our fruits and nuts are grown. But the subtropical industry extends all along the coast. from basically San Francisco along the coast through Monterey, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Ventura into San Diego. Then we've got an industry that's existing out here in the desert. Not included often is the date palm industry, which is a $100 million industry, and can only grow in California with the dry conditions that we have. To typify the subtropical industry is almost virtually impossible. Citrus is grown, and it's probably the most widely grown subtropical in the state, but it's grown from the Mexican border all the way north near the Oregon border. So it's probably the most commonly planted landscape backyard tree in the state. There may be more backyard citrus trees than there are the total commercial citrus industry in the state. So that's growing across a huge diversity. I mean, the average rainfall is less than 500 millimeters where this is grown, but you know, you can go from Kern County, which is down here, where they don't even get close to that. It's more like 150 millimeters of rainfall to Northern California, where they're regularly going to be getting somewhere in the range of 600 to 800 millimeters. And the evapotranspiration varies tremendously across this region as well. Along the coast, where much of these oddball subtropicals are grown, like feijoa and avocados and so on. The fluctuation, seasonal fluctuation in ET is tremendous. Our wintertime ET may be higher than it is in the summertime because of the coastal fog. Whereas when you get into the Central Valley, once you get into the summertime, it's reliably hot, and you irrigate, and you're always behind times. So because of this variation in farm sizes, you get some very distinctive differences in irrigation management. So most of these subtropicals are grown in Southern California, this region that is south of the Central Valley, where land prices are very high, water prices are high, labor is even more expensive than Khan talked about. The farms are small. The average avocado grower in the state has less than 3 hectares. There's 7,000 avocado growers. The total Cherimoya area planted is 400 hectares. We've got 75 hectares of coffee growers, which comprise about 100 different growers. There's probably more citrus grown in backyards in the state than commercially grown. Everywhere you go, though, these have problems. And water, as Mae underlines, did I say Mae? Underline water. Water is a major problem in California. And the subtropical industry is growing not just water-sensitive crops. I mean, avocados wilt in the slightest heat, but they also are very dependent on high-quality water. They need water that has low salinity. And when you come along the coast, where most of our water is well water, we're dealing with salinity. The thing that is fortunate that along the coast is the ET demand is low, and as a consequence, the irrigation requirements are low. So the bulk of the Southern California industry is dominated by micro irrigation, micro sprinklers, drip irrigation. When you go into the Central Valley, most of the citrus is on drip. Certainly orchards that are younger than 20 years of age are on drip. It's always surprising to see how much in the Central Valley is still on flood and furrow irrigation, because water still is relatively cheap and in large volumes. The water output along the coast, when in a well, we're talking you know, 200, 300, 400 gallons a minute, whereas in the Central Valley, the wells are putting out 2,000, 4,000 gallons per minute. So the flows are tremendously different. And that's partly why the orchards are smaller along the coast than they are in the Central Valley, because of the water availability. The two dominant subtropical tree crops that are grown in California, though, are avocados, which comprise about 25,000 hectares, and it's primarily coastal. This is a crop that does not like extremes of temperature, heat or cold. It's a $350 million industry. It fluctuates depending on the year. It's an alternate bearing crop. Citrus, on the other hand, is comprised primarily of oranges, which are grown primarily in the Central Valley, and lemons. There's about 70,000 hectares of oranges, which is about $1 billion industry. Lemons are 25,000 hectares, primarily grown along the coast. It's about a $500 million industry. More and more, though, lemons are grown in the Central Valley because it's a crop that returns better than oranges generally. With the COVID crisis right now, citrus is especially lemon prices are way down. The other large growing areas, the desert in California, where it's also grown in the Arizona area. The bulk of the citrus is fresh market. About 10% of both avocados and citrus is organically certified. The major orange growing areas are Kern, Tulare, and Fresno, the area where they also are growing the nuts that Mae was talking about, walnuts, almonds, and pistachios. So they're, growers making these decisions about whether they're going to grow a high profit nut, or are they going to grow oranges with the problems that are associated with oranges. And right now, the big problem with oranges, citrus in general, is Wang Long Bing, which is HLB, the problem that's affecting citrus worldwide. The area where these citrus are grown are in are large ag economies. Each of the counties, Kern, Tulare, Fresno, Kings, are producing over $7 billion of gross income in all agricultural crops. So these are big farms, big industry, big water users. And I want to throw in the berry industry. Andre is going to talk more extensively as well about blueberries, raspberries, and strawberries. These are growing along the coast for the most part, and they're in competition with other subtropicals. These are plants that don't like a lot of heat, don't like a lot of cold, as they are grown along the coast. Blueberries are along the coast are an evergreen crop. When they're grown in the Central Valley, where it's hotter and colder, they become a deciduous crop, and they're grown the same way they are in the rest of the country. But along the coast, these are in competition actually with the avocado and other subtropicals. These are with blueberries in the state. There's 15,000 hectares, and there's about 2,000 hectares that are grown along the coast. Raspberries, 4,000 hectares, are grown along the coast. Strawberries are grown along the coast. These are big value crops, and they're in competition with the subtropicals because they love the climate where subtropicals are grown. Okay, so this picture doesn't show up very well, but in the United States, we're in competition with what's grown in Latin America. So we're either in competition or complementing what is grown in Chile, and Argentina, and so on. California is growing very similar crops. In theory, these things are off season, so that in the summertime when we're producing blueberries, that's off season for the production in Chile, and so blueberries come up here in the wintertime when blueberry production is low in the United States. So it turns out in many cases, a lot of the companies that are growing these subtropicals, Driscoll's, Mission, Dole, Westphalia, Wonderful, are at operations that are in Latin America. Most of our off-season citrus imports are coming from Chile, Peru, Australia in large part. So the California industry is complemented, or is complemented by production in other areas. However, for the most part, the subtropicals that are grown in California are consumed in the United States. Lemons and strawberries are probably the dominant export crops that we have. We do ship oranges and other citrus out of the country, but we tend to keep most of this crop in the country. Most of the companies that are producing in California are worldwide, and they're sourcing from other countries. Avocados. The US consumes 2.5 billion kilograms of avocados, and California is only producing 200 million. So the rest of that crop in the United States is coming from Mexico, largely, but increasingly from Peru, Chile, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, South Africa, New Zealand, and some other countries are trying to get into the US market as well. The US is the largest importer of avocados. It's not the largest grower, it's the largest importer, and it's dominated by the Hass variety. Avocados, of all the subtropicals that we grow, need the highest water quality. They need a mild weather. They don't want it too hot or too cold. They need absolutely good drainage. And they have a seasonal labor requirement. So that there's also actually something you need to do in an avocado orchard all the time. But the major demand is when the prices are good, and that's when avocados are picked. Avocados are unusual in that they can hang on the tree for a long time, and it's the grower and the market that determine when they are harvested. It's not when the fruit is ripe on the tree so much. Water prices are increasing. Again, avocados are grown primarily along the coast. There's a few that are planted in the Central Valley, but it's too hot and too cold there for them to prosper. The water prices are compounded by water regulations, and a lot of this is dependent on fertilizer use and how it's abused or not used correctly, and the groundwater recharge issues that Mae was talking about. We have very expensive land along the coast, so the trees that are growing in Southern California have to compete with housing, and housing in general is going to pay more for land than these subtropical crops are. One of the problems is we're getting more erratic weather. We are getting heat spells along the coast that we never had before, but we are getting fewer freezes. We are getting longer and more droughts, and we are dealing more and more with wildfires. Southern California is home to wildfires. The whole state is home to wildfires for that matter, but Southern California has been notable in the number of wildfires that have always happened here. And many of the tree crops that we grow abut wild areas where the wildfires start, and then we'll move into avocado orchards. So this is a major consideration that avocado growers have, is how to deal with fire. One of the things that's happened with the imports that have come from Mexico, Peru, and so on is that the average consumption in the United States has gone from 1.5 kilograms to nearly 5 kilograms in the last 20 years. And in Chile alone, they're eating 11 kilograms per person. So its potential, avocado potential for consumption is going to increase. Citrus, the same issues. We're dealing with water, and nutrient regulations. Citrus is dealing with drought issues in the Central Valley, where the bulk of the citrus is grown. We're dealing with labor issues. There's phytosanitary export issues that are growers have to contend with when they're exporting to Japan and Korea and other countries. But the big problem is Wanglong-Bing, HLB, the bacterial infection that has caused such a terrible impact on citrus production worldwide, Brazil included. It showed up, the Asian citrus psyllid, which transmits the bacteria, showed up 10 years ago, and it spread throughout Southern California. It's the disease as yet is only found in backyard trees. As yet, there have been no official identifications of infected HLB trees in commercial orchards. One of the things that's happening is that California exported a tremendous lot of fruit, but more and more Argentina, Chile, and Spain are coming to dominate a lot of the export markets. In citrus, large farms tend to dominate the industry and distribution. Sunkist, which is a cooperative, was once the giant of distributors, and now it's much less important. California produces close to 60% of the US citrus in the United States, and the bulk of that citrus is as fresh fruit. Florida used to be the big player in the United States, but it's lost nearly half its acreage due to Wanglong-Bing. In California, about half of our production is in navels. A growing proportion is in mandarins. 16% is in lemons, 11% as Valencias, juice fruit, and then we have a lot of minors. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that California is a very dynamic agriculture. It keeps changing, it keeps renewing itself. So the California industry was predominantly navel oranges to a certain extent Valencia oranges. Valencias have become much less important as a juice orange. There are many different varieties of navels that are being grown to increase the length of the season. Washington navel used to be primarily a winter fruit. Now there's early season navels that are picked in the fall and late seasons that are grown into the summer, harvested into the summer. So the navel industry varieties are changing considerably, but more and more this pack, the 2.5 kilo pack of mandarins are coming to dominate. People don't buy bulk fruit to the same extent they did before. They go in and they buy a bag of 2.5 kilo mandarins. I was going to say whoopies, but they're delights and cuties and things like that, and they're easy to peel and they're seedless and people love it. And the citrus industry is coming up to the profitability of nuts. So a lot of citrus industry has gone into almonds and walnuts. And so the growers are moving back and forth. And this is primarily the big growers, growers that are farming thousands of acres. And this is the story that's going on in the Central Valley. Along the coast, there's a competition between strawberries and lemons that are going on. And Andre will talk about this, but strawberries, they're highly labor demanding. They use a heck of a lot of water relative to lemons, and we're seeing a transition along the coast from strawberries to lemons to a certain extent, largely because of the water demand and the labor issues. So in citrus and in avocados, we're dealing with invasive pests and diseases. Laurel wilt disease, which is on the East Coast and potentially can come to California and literally kill a tree in a couple of months. We're dealing with polyphagous shot-hole borer or invasive shot-hole borer, which kind of make it more expensive to grow avocados. In citrus, we're dealing with Asian citrus psyllid and HLB. And as yet, it has not damaged the California citrus industry at this point. We're dealing with more and more regulations on the use of pesticides, and herbicides like glyphosate may be pulled from the market, as it has happened in production in Europe. We're seeing an increasing value in organic certification. A lot of growers would grow with organic principles, but they would not go through certification process because of the onerousness of all the paperwork, but some are choosing to do that now. So an example, and also because there's a value placed on organic by consumers. An example in case is Pixie Mandarin. Sales are down at this moment, but the organic growers, even though the quarantine that's going on with COVID has reduced consumption for more expensive exotics like cherimoya, but the income to the Pixie Mandarin, organic Pixie Mandarins, has stayed the same and actually increased. So here's the common question that I get. I'm a small grower. I've got 10 hectares, 20 hectares, 30 hectares, 1 hectare, whatever it is. What do I grow now? And so in Southern California, we tell people, don't grow what the rest of the country will grow. Don't grow what the Central Valley grows. Don't grow what Iowa grows, Minnesota. Choose something that takes advantage of your climate. Don't grow anything that can be stored and processed. Don't grow something that can be grown in a place like Costa Rica and stored, like macadamia nuts. Macadamias are a case in point. It was a wonderful crop that was planted here in the 1980s after avocados were dying with phytophthora root rot. And then Costa Rica started growing them, and they flooded the market with cheap nuts. And so macadamia growers in California are not making any money. So we're growing primarily perishable crops. And we are really a market-oriented producer. And you know, all growers are to a certain extent. But for example, the cost of, we're looking at how we produce things. So avocado pruning is expensive. We're now looking at high density orchards and actually looking at replant rather than pruning. You know, how do you make an avocado industry profitable? So it's, you know, there's avocado trees that are 400 or 500 years old in Mexico, but you know, we're looking at, you know, what's the most profitable period of a tree, and see if we can grow it during that period and then remove it and replant. Same thing with citrus. HLB is threatening the whole industry, and maybe we're looking at not growing a tree for 100 years, but looking at growing trees for just a short period of time, and then knowing that we will have to replace those trees in 10 to 15 years. So planting at high density and getting the optimum yield for that period. So it's you know, California has always been a very dynamic industry. It's becoming more and more dynamic. Case in point is in Ventura, where I work primarily. In the 1890s, it was one of the dominant wheat producing areas. It was the largest sugar beet growing area in the whole wide world. It became the greatest lima bean growing area in the whole wide world. It was then the largest walnut growing area. We don't grow wheat or sugar beets any longer. We're the largest avocado growing area in the United States right now, but it's being replaced by things like coffee, and there's 4,000 hectares of hemp that were grown this last year. So, people are looking for new ways of farming. So with that, I'll pass the baton on to someone else.
All right, thank you very much, Ben, for your excellent presentation. Next presenter is Khaled Bali. He is an irrigation specialist with the University of California, and he's going to present about field crop production in the low desert area. Khaled, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, well, I think we have technical difficulties. How about now?
Yes, we can start seeing something. No, hold on. I think, Rogers, you probably need to help Khaled, because this is clearly a technical glitch here. So Khaled, you probably want to stop sharing your screen, and Rogers will advance your slide while you talk. Okay.
All right. So good morning, good afternoon. My name is Khaled Bali. I'm an irrigation specialist with the University of California Cooperative Extension, based in the Central Valley and a city close to Fresno. And I'll be talking about field crop production in the low desert, where I spent about 25 years of my career down there. And done a lot of work on field crops. Next. Okay, so just to give you an idea, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the water situation in California. Most of the water resources is available in Northern California. You can think about, San Francisco and north. But when it comes to the demand, most of the demand is in the Central Valley and Southern California. And down in the Imperial Valley, or the low desert region, the only source of irrigation water is the Colorado River, which is used by 7 states and Mexico. And so we are on the lower end of the Colorado River. Next. Okay, this is just to give you an idea about, the top commodities in California. Field crops, there are only, typically you'll find maybe 2-3 field crops in the top 15 to 20 commodities in California. When it comes to water use, most of the water use is actually by field crops. If you take a look here at the slide, between almond, pistachios, and alfalfa, about maybe 30% of the California water use on just these 3 crops. Next. Okay, this is statewide, and you can see alfalfa and other forages are the top crop when it comes to field crops. We have also cotton and rice. Now, next. Now, when we go to the desert, or Southern California, where the Imperial Valley is, next slide, please. It's the majority of the crops down in the desert are field crops. But when it comes to value, their value comes to about $500 million. compared to, higher value crops like vegetable and melon crops. Their value about $1 billion. So even though we have most of the acreages or most of the area in field crops, but most of the income comes from the vegetable and melon crops. Next. So this is just to give you an idea. The low desert or the Imperial Valley has alfalfa more than any other location in California. Right now, this year, there's about 155,000 acres. And keep in mind, 1 acre is about 0.4 hectare. So that's a major production area for alfalfa hay as well as alfalfa seed. And then there are 3 other major grasses: Bermuda grass, climb grass, and Sudan grass. And they make about 130 to 140,000 acres. Then sugar beet is a big crop down in the Imperial Valley, about 24 to 25,000 acres. And that's the only production region left in California for sugar beets. Wheat, right now, it's going down to about 25,000 acres. We used to have as much as 100,000 acres of wheat. So when you look at the total area of field crops, they comprise about 70 to 75 of the total production area in the Imperial Valley. And definitely most of the water use is on field crops. Next slide, please. Vegetable crops are also big in the region, even though acreage-wise, they're a lot less than field crops. But the Imperial Valley is a major production area for vegetable crops in the winter and early spring. So major vegetable crops include broccoli, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, a whole bunch of different types of lettuce that they go all over the United States. Next slide, please. Other major vegetable crops, onions and spinach. Also, those crops are, typically grown during the winter period. Next slide, please. And there are, date production in Southern California and also Arizona. So there are about 3,000 acres of dates that they're used all over the U.S. and actually some of them are exported. There is some citrus production, maybe lemons, but the area is relatively small compared to other production areas in California. Next slide, please. So when it comes to California, the main water sources are snowpack, water stored in reservoir, and groundwater. And these 3 different types of sources of water are used to grow crops. Now, during drought years, we rely mostly on groundwater. Now, when it comes to field crops in California in general, when we have droughts, there's more demand on water for permanent crops. So typically we have reduction in field crops. But what's different about the Imperial Valley is the water situation is completely different. So it depends only on the Colorado River water. So you may have a drought in California, but Imperial Valley is completely unaffected because the source of water coming from other states through the Colorado River water. And as you can see, over the last 15 years, we have a lot of shift of field crops in California, but that did not impact the field crop production in Imperial Valley. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm sure all of you are familiar with Las Vegas. If you go just a few kilometers or miles outside Las Vegas, there's a huge lake called Lake Mead, which is the largest reservoir in the US. It holds about 36 billion cubic meter of water. It was built back in the early 1930s. And as you can see, over the last 20 years, from about the year 2000 until now, the water elevation in the lake has been going down. And the drought condition on the lake is defined by the elevation of the lake. So there are different levels of water stored in the lake. So the minute we get to about elevation of 1125 feet, you could see in the middle of the screen here, that's where we consider a drought. And you can see we've been operating in a drought conditions over the last 15 years or so. And the elevation has been going down and going to the elevation where we consider shortish condition 1, which is an elevation of 1075 feet. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a satellite view of Lake Mead going into, back in July of 2000 when the water level was really high. So you could see the shrinkage of the lake over the years. And you take a look at the right, where you look at the lake area in July 2015. So over a 15-year period, the lake elevation dropped by anywhere from 33 to 37 meters. And basically, less water available for irrigation and everything else. Next slide, please. Major irrigation systems that we have in California, same as everywhere else, surface or flood irrigation or gravity irrigation. It's a big irrigation system in the Interior Valley. It used to be the biggest irrigation system in California, but not anymore. But in the Imperial Valley, it's still the major irrigation system. And within the surface irrigation, we have different types: border irrigation and furrow irrigation. Those are the most commonly used surface irrigation systems in the Imperial Valley. There is a little bit of sprinkler irrigation on field crops, but most of the sprinkler irrigation is on vegetable crops. There's also, over the last 10 years or so, we've seen more demand and more interest in subsurface drip irrigation on field crops, for example, alfalfa. And you can see one of the pictures to your right. That's alfalfa production in the Imperial Valley under subsurface drip irrigation, where typically you get higher water use efficiency and the yield. Next slide, please. Okay, so on the left, the graph on the left, it shows, the different type of irrigation systems in California. As I mentioned earlier, back in the 70s, flood irrigation or gravity irrigation used to be the major irrigation system. Right now, it went down from about 80% down to 30%. Now, when you look at the state of California, most of the irrigation systems, about 50% are drip irrigation or micro sprinklers. Well, that also added to the main reason for this, more emphasis on efficient irrigation system and also reduction in the amount of field crops that we have in California. So just between 2006 and 2017, we lost about 30% of the field crops in California, and we got more of permanent crops. Next slide, please. So one of the big factors that also helped in the implementation of drip irrigation systems is one of the incentives programs. There are several incentives programs in California available to growers that help them to switch to more pressurized irrigation system. And typically, these incentives are used on vegetable crops and tree crops. Very few growers who use field crops can take advantage of these systems because they're using a flood irrigation system. And typically with a flood irrigation system, you're not using energy. And with this particular type of incentive, you have to show water savings as well as energy savings. So if you're using flood irrigation, you're not using energy. So anyone who's using flood irrigation is not eligible for this program unless they're using groundwater. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an idea, typical alfalfa field in the low desert in the Imperial Valley. They're typically about 80 acres or about 34 hectares, and mostly border irrigation. Border width is anywhere from 20 meters to 100 meters. Border length is about 340 to 350 meters. The biggest concern with the field crops and sustainability of field crops in the Imperial Valley and elsewhere in California is the cost of irrigation water. So you can see just this small, 34-acre field, the cost of irrigation labor is about $5,100 a year. Next slide, please. So we've been trying to look at ways where we can improve efficiency on field crops. This is just an example about, modern irrigation system where you can, grower can get as much water as they want. They can turn the system on and off. That will give them flexibility. So in this example, on very light soil, this is in Central California, where we can, utilize one of the ways to improve efficiency on surface irrigation by cutting the border length in half, and then we can get a great improvement in irrigation efficiency. Next slide, please. So we've been also working on ways to cut on the labor cost as well as improving surface irrigation efficiency. So as you may know, growers, irrigators work in typically 12 hours or 24-hour shift. So you may have an irrigator in the field, for about 24 hours, making decisions on when to turn the water off based on so many different variables, like the flow rate, how fast the water is moving from one end of the field to the other end, crop height, and so many other specific variables related to the field of interest. Now, we could use automation to make decisions. Instead of making decisions by taking observations, we could use sensors like flow meters, advanced rate sensors, automated gates, reference evapotranspiration, and so on, to make a good decision on when we can turn the water off to maximize water saving. So early on, the interest was on conserving water, but as the labor cost is increasing in California, right now it's $13 per hour plus about 40% of overhead. Now that figure is going to $15 in just about 2 years. So now the emphasis is, if we can use automation to save on labor, but also conserve water. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an idea about different type of flood irrigated gates. These are, we started this work on research centers, owned by the University of California. We tried different gates. Next slide, please. And then we took those automated gates and we took them into commercial fields. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an idea about different type of automated gates, flow meters, advanced sensors on crops such as field crops such as alfalfa and cline grass here. And you can see, different form of sensors in the field that we use to make decisions on when the water needs to be turned off to improve efficiency. Next slide, please. This is one of the major companies that mostly they started working on canal automation, and then they got into automating flood irrigation in commercial fields. Started in Australia, and for the last 7 or 8 years, we've been implementing automated gates on commercial fields in the Imperial Valley. You could see, it's not just changing the gate. There's also a whole bunch of infrastructure that needs to go on the irrigation system, like the delivery gate that you see on the left side of the screen, to make the system work. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an idea. Typically when we think about flood irrigation systems, we think about low efficiency, low distribution uniformity. This is using automated gates on commercial fields. We can have application efficiencies as high as 87% and distribution uniformities as high as 90% or 95%. This is very similar to the efficient pressurized irrigation systems such as drip irrigation or sprinkler irrigation. Next slide, please. One of the big advantages of field crops, and since alfalfa is the biggest crop in California, is that we have the flexibility, to turn the water off and implement deficit irrigation in summertime if we have drought conditions or if we don't have enough water to irrigate the crop. And most of the time, the alfalfa will survive. We can turn the water off in summertime in Imperial Valley, come back in the fall and irrigate, and we could, get good production. So alfalfa gives us the flexibility to implement deficit irrigation practices and conserve water when we have drought conditions. And also in the Central Valley, where we have overdraft of groundwater, we could use alfalfa fields in wintertime as a place where we can store excess flood water and try to recharge groundwater. This is just to give you an idea where we used alfalfa. This is just from data earlier this year. We could get as much as 2 meters of groundwater recharge by flooding alfalfa fields in winter time. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we think about improving on-farm efficiency, definitely we get more water savings, but there are consequences or negative effects. One of them is salinity buildup. Colorado River water, by the time it reaches California, it has been used several times, and the salinity in California, it's about 700 parts per million. So when you apply about 2 meters of water on alfalfa, you may end up applying about 5 or 6 metric tons of salt per acre, or half an hectare. So you could see salinity buildup would be a major factor. When we become also more efficient, there's less water going to groundwater recharge. So practical options when we consider, efficient irrigation systems on flood irrigation and, pressurized irrigation systems, we may want to have irrigation system for irrigating the crop and another complete different system for groundwater recharge. This would be applicable to, crops like alfalfa. We want to design the system to optimize profit. And it's not just about water savings. Energy costs are high. And in California, there's a lot of emphasis on greenhouse gas emissions. So saving water will save or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. When we think about irrigation districts in California, they were designed for flood irrigation systems. Now, as we move more and more into pressurized irrigation system, we want to make sure that we have flexibility on the delivery of that water to the farm. Next slide, please. And just to summarize, we've seen a huge reduction in field crops in California. And this is because of limited water supplies, crop shift, and the groundwater issues, but not in the Imperial Valley, because the Imperial Valley depends on, all the water comes from the Colorado River. To sustain field crops production in California, we need to address the high labor costs. And I think things like automation will greatly help when it comes to, improving the efficiency and reducing the cost of labor. Field crops such as alfalfa could be a great crops to address water shortages. So we could go with depth irrigation, and we can still, make money. And when we have excess water, we could use these fields for groundwater recharge. We also have to look at the flexibility of an irrigation system. So most of the traditional irrigation systems, you don't have flexibility. You order water for 12 hours or 24 hours, as it is the case right now in Imperial Valley. We have also to look at the combined, water savings and the energy associated with irrigation, with the irrigated crops, especially field crops. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions in California is a big thing, and there are, reducing water use will definitely reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Utilizing surface irrigation is also a great way because there is no energy associated with such irrigation system. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you, Khaled, for your very comprehensive and excellent presentation. And now we have the last speaker, who is Andre Biscaro, and he will try to load up his presentation. Khaled, I think you have to stop, or Rogers, you have to stop sharing your screen so Andre can start.
Right. So it's not working again, so Rogers will have to pass my presentation.
All right. So Andre, you might want to introduce yourself in the meanwhile that
Sure.
Rogers loads up your slides.
Sure. So my name is Andre Biscaro, and I work for the University of California Cooperative Extension Office in Ventura County as a irrigation and water resource advisor. So I also serve Los Angeles and San Bernardino counties. During this presentation, I'll give you everyone an overview of my research and extension program and of the agricultural issues here in Ventura County, mostly related to berry and vegetable crops and irrigation and nutrient management, which is the field I work on. Ben Faber already provided a nice overview of the main production factors involved in subtropicals, berry, vegetables, and all other crops grown here in Ventura County, which is very diverse. So I was wondering if Rogers has the presentation on.
Rogers, can you upload the slides for Andre? All right, here we go.
Okay, good. Next slide, please, Rogers. Okay, so during this presentation, I'll give you a context of the agriculture in Ventura County, talking about the climate, the crops, water availability and water quality, environmental regulations, and how the research projects we're conducting try to address those issues. So next, please. So this is the reference evapotranspiration map of California, showing a huge variability in climate. We have a pretty mild climate along the coast with very high evapotranspiration in the deserts, in the central and in the southeastern of California. Next, please. And that's where Ventura County is located, in the South Coast. Next, please. So, as Ben mentioned, this is a Mediterranean climate with warm and dry summers, mild and wet winters. As you can see, the winter months, January, February, December, we have precipitation rates that almost match the reference of evapotranspiration, but moving towards the summer, there's a huge difference between ET and precipitation. So approximately 99% of the agriculture is irrigated here in Ventura County. Next, please. So the top 10 leading crops are strawberries by far, as in gross value, the #1 crop with over $670 million in gross value, followed by 4 crops that usually stay around the same value, and those are lemons, celery, nursery stock, and raspberries. And we have avocados, tomatoes, cut flowers, peppers, cabbage, cilantro, parsley, and a few others. Next, please. So the total value of agriculture in the county is $2.1 billion. Irrigated land, it's 91,000 acres. Urbanized land is just a little above that, 106,000 acres. So we have a big number of farms considering our acreage, 2,150 farms. So there are a lot of farms, especially avocado farms, who are very few acreage, small farms. 85% of the water use is it comes from groundwater. Next, please. And the main irrigation type here is micro irrigation, drip, micro sprinklers, with a few fields still fully grown on overhead sprinklers, and some that are established with sprinklers, followed by drip irrigation. Next, please. So the water used in California varies a lot, mostly from the north to the south. This is an average where 50% of the water goes to environmental use, 40% to agriculture, and 10% urban. Next, please. And that's definitely a reason for a dispute between growers and environmentalists and urban. Next, please. And the dispute was exacerbated until a few years ago, maybe in the last 2 decades, that led us to this huge drought that finished about 2 to 3 years ago, where Southern California is hit the hardest, especially Ventura County. Next. And that led us to some stricter regulations in regards to water use. So the California governor at the time signed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which mandated that every groundwater basin in California needed to be regulated, meaning that it had to have a groundwater sustainability plan. So the extractions or any extraction from that aquifer needs to meet safe or sustainable goals. Next. Basically, growers wouldn't or water users shouldn't extract more than the safe yield. And I don't expect you to read this table here. I just want to illustrate that Ventura County is being ahead with regulating water use. In the first column on the left, you see the list of crops grown in the county, and then in blue, green, and salmon colors, you see the different regions where you have closer to the coast, the blue region, and the central and more eastern side that uses more water. And then within those, you have a dry, a typical, and a wet year. So Ventura County has been using this for years. Next slide, please. But we're transitioning to a different system based on this ordinance that's effective on October 1st. Most of Ventura County will have to use water allocation based on an average pumping for that well, for each well, from 2005 to 2014. Next. And that new phase will actually impose a significant restrictions in water use for most growers. Another fact that, excuse me, has Ventura County ahead of most of the state is this water market program, where we're currently in phase 2. It's a pilot phase, but there has been water trades with an average price of $332 per acre feet. And this program is expected to be fully implemented in the fall in a few months, where every groundwater well here in Ventura County has a flow meter with a telemetry device that sends the information monthly of how much water each well is extracting to the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency. That way, the agency has a lot more control on how much water is being used on each groundwater basin. Next. We also have issues with seawater intrusion being close to the coast, especially towards the southeast end of the county. Next, please. The next graph shows the irrigation water, mostly from well water, electrical conductivity in decibels per meter, where you see about 15 to 20% of this water with EC lower than 1 decibels per meter, and then a good portion, maybe 40%, between 1 and 1.5. And then you have also a fairly decent amount of water with EC above 1.5, and that's maybe 40% of the remaining water. So we do have issues here with EC, mostly calcium carbonate, sulfates towards the coast, sodium and chloride dominating that composition of the electrical conductivity. Next slide, please. So Ventura County crops in general are sensitive to mild water stress, which means they require increased irrigation frequency. They have shallow or relatively shallow root systems. They're usually grown on well-drained soils, and they are high-value crop, meaning that small yield losses can cause significant impact on returns. So those associated with the fact that, next please, most of the soil nitrogen is in the form of nitrate. Nitrate is very soluble in water, and nitrate is weakly held in the soil CC. Next please. That causes a condition that's very conducive to nitrate leaching. So the red dots are representing nitrate in the soil, and the blue front is the irrigation water passing the root zone. So next slide, please. So once that nitrate passes the bottom of the root zone, it only keeps going down until you reach the aquifer. Next slide, please. So this map shows all the, excuse me, all the groundwater wells in California, with the red dots showing the groundwater wells that have nitrate levels that exceed the drinking water standard of 10 ppms per liter, of 10 ppms or 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate nitrogen. Next, we also have found some exceeding values in the southern part of the county for surface water. However, compared to several regions in the state, Ventura County is actually doing a good job as far as water quality goes. Next slide, please. However, the state now mandates that every grower or a CCA, or actually every field that's grown in the county or in this region, needs to fill out a nitrogen management plan, or needs to have these nitrogen management plan worksheets filled out by the grower or by the CCA, the certified crop advisor who sells the fertilizers for this grower. So in this form, the person needs to fill out with crop information acreage, projected yield, and then the actual yield, total nitrogen applied, nitrogen removed means nitrogen that leaves the field with the produce that's harvested. And then it needs to summarize nitrogen applied as fertilizer in liquid form, solid, foliar, organic matter added, residual nitrogen, and at the end, what the Regional Water Quality Control Board wants is to compare the nitrogen applied versus the nitrogen removed. So if a crop or if a grower used 250 pounds to fertilize this crop, and that crop had 150 pounds of nitrogen removed, there was 100 pounds of nitrogen left in that field. So those are the numbers regional boards are interested. At the time, these nitrogen management plans need to stay on farm. Next, please. So in summary, there are water quality restrictions, water availability restrictions in Ventura County. Water quality and price varies significantly. We have a water market to start addressing that, and that should somehow equalize the price among different regions. Can you go back, please? Yeah. And there is also nitrogen management regulations. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, I'll show how our research and extension program is focusing on addressing those issues. And we're doing that mostly with creating information and tools for improving water and nitrogen use efficiency, and also trying to address salinity management and other soil fertility issues with different projects. Next, please. So we have worked quite extensively with the software that most of you may have already heard. It's called Crop Manage. It's free. It was created by one of my colleagues, Michael Kahn, out in Monterey County with the University of California Cooperative Extension as well. Next slide, please. So, and next, please. So the software is a database-driven application that uses soil type, weather station information, and soil nitrate test done with the quick test or done with performed by a laboratory, and uses multi-year research done regionally in each county in order to provide two things: nitrogen fertilizer recommendations and irrigation recommendations. Next. So uses, as I mentioned, ET crop models and nitrogen models, basically the nitrogen uptake curve and how much nitrogen there's in the soil. And for the irrigation component, it uses the closest seamless stations, ETO, the reference of transpiration, and the crop coefficient for the crop. And we adjust that crop coefficient based on the canopy development for the crop. All those based on previous research we have developed through the years. Next slide, please. So this summarizes the results of replicated studies we conducted with strawberries. So there are more studies, but I only summarize here a few. Basically, the marketable yield of crop managed compared to grower standards, and the grower standards were all for each one of these studies. They were based with, they were performed with a different cooperating grower. So we either got similar yields or higher yields with crop managed. When we got similar yields, we either reduced the water use or fertilizer use or both. When we got higher yields, we had to increase water or nitrogen fertilizer use. It really depended on what the comparison treatment was. Next slide, please. For celery, we found very similar results with either similar or higher yields, and the water and fertilizer use varied according to each field. Next slide. So those results show that the software is actually quite accurate, uses very pertinent information for creating irrigation and nitrogen fertilizer recommendations. And that's why we'll be putting significant amount of effort, especially now with regulations making water availability more restrict and water quality a little more difficult to manage in regards to fertilizers. And we're updating the crop coefficient for celery. Michael Kahn and I, we conducted a few studies that showed that the crop coefficient could be off and underestimating irrigation needs. So we're conducting these studies right now. We're through the second season. Next slide, please. We have assessed the soil water potential thresholds for determining when is the right time to irrigate these crops. In this case was with celery, showing that 20 centibars or minus 20 kilopascals is ideal. Once you go from 20 to 50, you have a approximate 10% yield decline. Next slide, please. And also, we have been assessing nitrogen uptake and removal for the major berry and vegetable crops for years. Where we have continued doing that in order to help growers to apply the right rate at the right time and be more efficient with the nitrogen use, and also for them to help them to fill out their nitrogen management plan worksheets. Next slide, please. Building on that previous projects, on those previous projects with strawberries, we created a rate study where we tried a low and optimum and a high rate for fertilization of nitrogen fertilization of strawberries. And what I'd like to show in here is that with the, unfortunately I cannot move the mouse, but the medium AN20, which is the ammonium nitrate fertilizer, which is the second to last in the bottom graph, performed the best with the highest yields among with others with high nitrogen application, but that means we can achieve optimum yields with moderate levels of nitrogen fertilization. At the same time, we have the least amount of leaching passing below the root zone, and that's what this graph here shows. Next, please. We also have assessed the salinity effect in local crops. We have worked on strawberries specifically, and we're looking at other crops. Next slide, please. So we have issues with the sodium absorption ratio, chlorides, sulfates, and so we designed this treatment and obtained very interesting results. Next. We're also focusing quite a bit on the soil nitrate quick test, which is helping us a lot with guiding the fertilization program. So most of these crops in here have fertilization programs that can be adjusted throughout the season once you have the soil nitrate information. Next. So that was it for my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer any questions in case there are any.
All right, thank you very much, Andre. This was our last presentation, but we have a few questions now from the audience that we can ask, and I'm going to ask the question in the same sequence of the presentation. So first question is to Mae Culumber. What do you think, so how long do you think the orchards under salt condition will keep producing? So this is a first question for you, and I have a bunch of others.
Oh, good. Well, I think that's highly dependent on the level of salts in the soil and water and the composition. You know, some things like boron, high boron accumulation will have probably more detrimental effects than sodium over time. It also depends on what impact the salts are having on drainage in the orchard. If high salts is coupled with drainage problems, you're often going to have anoxic conditions that are damaging to the tree roots, that will slow or shorten the lifespan of the orchard. But in terms of thresholds, some of the research that was used to look at salt tolerance in pistachio found that a level of 8 decisiemens per meter before they saw a significant decline in yield. But with this study, the trees did not receive the highly saline water early in their development stage. Some later research looking at trees from planting through the productive stage found the threshold is more likely closer to 6 decisiemens per meter. And so if you can maintain with your irrigation and leaching program levels preferably below 6 decisiemens per meter, you may attain, maybe up to 40 years. Some trees live to be 100 years, but maybe you can expect a good productive lifetime, less than 6 decisiemens per meter.
All right, thank you, Mae. The other question that I have from the audience, actually the other two questions pretty much related. The first one deals with drip irrigation or micro irrigation. So the question is drip irrigation an important tool for pushing salts? Isn't rainfall sufficient in California to leach the salts from irrigation? And I'll probably comment after you answer.
Okay. Well, drip irrigation, even though it's highly efficient in delivering water to the surface, one challenge that may have come with it is that it's so precise with the delivery of water that the level of evapotranspiration, evaporation from the soil surface may exceed the water that is being applied with the drip irrigation. So this would lead to the actual accumulation of salts. Oftentimes we see this on the edges of the wetting pattern. To account for this, a lot of irrigation managers will apply a leaching fraction in addition to their irrigation scheduling, so additional water to account for that leaching fraction. But you need to keep in mind that you'll only ever be able to leach the salts from the soil is dependent on the level of salinity in your water. So if you have 3 decisiemens per meter salinity in your water, you'll never be able to push the salts below that. And then also because of the wetted front of your drip line could be a point of accumulation of salts in the soil as well. So what else was I going to say about that?
So is there a specific period of the year when leaching, the application of extra water will be more effective in leaching salt from the soil root zone?
Yes, we believe that the dormant period is the best time. You don't have the trees transpiring, contributing to evapotranspiration, so the ET rates are very low in wintertime, so you don't have the upward capillary motion of the salts collecting at the surface. It's easier to push them down with the water. Oftentimes, some of the most important pistachio growing areas only receive maybe 6 inches or so of which would be 150 or so millimeters of rain, which would be a marginal amount for leaching salts. It may be better to have closer to 300 millimeters. It just depends on what the salt load is. But winter is definitely a better time to do the leaching, and it's best to try to complete that before root flush in the spring of the following year.
And also, I think winter is when you have low temperature, and so that water applied to the soil has generally less soil evaporation, right?
Exactly. Yes, less soil. Yes, less evaporation.
Yeah. So I would comment also on Mae's answers that pistachio is being grown on marginal soils, and those marginal soils are not. Salinity in these soils is not induced by irrigation water, but it's the results of geological processes. So those are used to be marine deposit areas. So there are salts in the soil profile that don't come from irrigation water. So it's pretty difficult to leach those salts only with drip or micro irrigation. So, and those soils also have a lot of sodium, which generates a lot of deflocculation of the soil particles. So those soils are marginal, have high salinity, but also high sodicity. So the penetration of water, it's pretty problematic. So you can apply how much water you want, but there's no enough drainage to leach the soil past the root zone. And so this is a pretty complicated situation for growers.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Mae. I'll proceed with a question from the audience to Khan. And one question relates to the planting orientation. So do you guys have an idea of how the row orientation of vines somehow affect evapotranspiration, and whether this has been measured in wine grapes or table grapes? So in terms of the effect of row orientation on evapotranspiration. And then I have a follow-up question for you, Khan.
We never measure the actual, excuse me, we never measure the actual evapotranspiration in these vineyard systems. It's desperately needed. However, as we orient the vineyards north-south, the heat gain on these vineyards on the western side is tremendous. We see the berry temperatures increase as much as up to 56 degrees Celsius on the berries. And if you are able to supply enough water, you would increase the evapotranspiration in the system. Conversely, when we put the vineyards on an east-west orientation, in this case, the southern side of the vineyard heats up, but not as much as the north-south oriented vineyards, but that should be an active area of research which we have not, explored.
All right. Khan, can also some people from the audience ask if you can provide an idea of the economic water productivity for grapes, given the fact that grapes, especially wine grape, is a highly valuable crop in California. Did you have can you provide a range of values of the economic water productivity for wine grapes?
The numbers keep changing because of the volatility in the pricing of the market. But over the years, it has been somewhat settling around like $2 to $2.50 per cubic meter of water applied for wine grapes.
All right, thank you very much. And the next couple questions that I will ask are for Khaled Bali. One question is, on average, are surface irrigation method less efficient than other methods, and how much lower do you think is their efficiency compared to micro and sprinkler irrigation? So the question relates to on the average of the crop production, not on the experimental field.
Okay, so when it comes to surface irrigation systems, so we talked more about Imperial Valley, but I'll give you two figures. One for state of California. The average efficiency of a surface irrigation system would be in the neighborhood of 65 to 70%. That's statewide. When it comes to the Imperial Valley, the average efficiency of a surface irrigation system would be anywhere from 75 to 85%. And one of the biggest reasons that we have higher surface irrigation efficiency in the Imperial Valley is mostly because of the clay soils or heavy clay soils that will give you much more efficiency, higher distribution uniformity. So you have very little losses that goes into deep percolation below the root zone. So most of the losses are in terms of surface runoff that you can see and you can manage. So this is why when we look at automation, basically we're trying to reduce surface irrigation systems. So surface irrigation systems, they have the capability to be as efficient as other pressurized irrigation systems, as pressurized irrigation systems. The thing is, when you buy a drip system or a sprinkler system, you go and you design the system. So somebody is helping you there to design the system. Growers, they have no outlet to go and say, okay, I want to design a surface irrigation system. So they're designed by experience, from their experience, what worked for them. So there's a room to improve surface irrigation systems in California.
Yeah. So, Khaled, a follow-up question is, why the low desert still uses a surface irrigation method? Wouldn't it be better to use more efficient? What do you think are the barriers to adoption of more efficient irrigation methods in that area of California?
So actually, the desert or the Imperial Valley, they've been experimenting with so many different ways to improve irrigation efficiency. And the main driver for this is the demand for water in urban areas, San Diego and Los Angeles. So back 30 years ago, there was the first water transfer agreement from the agricultural area to Los Angeles, and then another agreement to San Diego. And so there were plenty of incentives to look at so many different irrigation systems. I'll just give you an example, linear move or center pivot system. For sure, yeah, it's more efficient than surface irrigation, but under the desert conditions, you lose a lot of water to evaporation. So that's one of the barriers to go to linear move or center pivots. Drip irrigation systems have been tried on field crops, on alfalfa, and some on sugar beets, but there are issues. Salinity buildup is one of those major issues when it comes to subsurface drip irrigation.
All right. And a final question for you, Khaled. In your view, what is the future of irrigation in Imperial Valley? And, what is the future for surface irrigation in that area? And adapt to changes in irrigation methods?
Yeah, I think the future for irrigation systems in the Imperial Valley, I think you'll still see a lot of flood irrigation, but I would see more on the efficient side where people will try to adapt management practices that they will improve efficiency. Another factor that we did not talk about, incentives to save water. So growers are being paid money to come up with water that can be transferred to San Diego or Los Angeles. So some of the incentives are already in place. So more efficient surface irrigation system. Definitely when it comes to vegetable crops, they're mostly on sprinkler irrigation system. And there are a lot of water conservation as we move from flood irrigation to sprinkler irrigation for vegetable crops, because they're typically grown on lighter soils or sandy soils, where you have a lot more deep percolation.
All right. Thank you very much, Khaled, for your help and contribution. Next set of questions are for Ben Faber. So the first one is, Ben, how growers in your area get adequate quality of irrigation water to irrigate avocado on the Central Coast? So do growers treat the water to make the irrigation water adequate for avocado?
Our saving grace is rainfall. And in years where we have no rainfall, we have a lot of damage to avocados. So along the coast, we typically get something on the order of 300 to 500 millimeters of rainfall, and that's in the wintertime, and we get our optimum leaching occurring at that time. There is a certain amount of reclaimed water that's being used that is put through a reverse osmosis, but that is very limited. It's expensive. And one of the major limitations is what to do with the treated water at that point. You need an outfall or somewhere to dump the water. And environmental regulations limit where that water can go. So there's not a whole lot of treated water. So we're terribly reliant on rainfall and the much lower evapotranspiration demand that occurs along the coast.
All right. The second question is, are you or other researcher somehow collected field data on the actual evapotranspiration of avocado and citrus orchard grown in commercial settings in the last probably 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, we've done work on the demand, and there are a few growers that do irrigate based on evapotranspiration. One of the critical issues is that we have a very diverse topography, east, west, north, south plantings, and the top of the hill is different from the bottom of the hills. So you can have extremely different water demand on just a small 10-hectare area. So yeah, work has been done. We have a pretty good idea of what the crop coefficients are for citrus and avocado.
All right. And Ben, the last question for you is, do you think fruit load affect the actual water use in avocado and citrus? And
Good
I know why you're
question.
smiling.
Good question. We tried to do that. There's been some work done in Israel that shows the crop load effect on, I think it was on peaches and bananas. And so I would suspect there is some effect, but we've not measured it. I don't know.
All right. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. The last couple of questions are for Andre Biscaro. So you talked about software package like Crop Manage. So a question from the audience is asking, how frequently are those software package updated in terms of the value of parameters used, like, for instance, crop coefficient or ET? Could you give us an idea of the frequency in updating this software?
Sure, that's actually a great question. So every time we conduct a study that has pertinent information, for it, we update the software. For example, right now we're going through our second season of updating the crop coefficient for celery, and we're going to get this data discussed with Michael Kahn, who oversees the software, and implement it if applicable. So nitrogen uptake, we have just also finished some data collection for strawberries and celery. We will be updating total nitrogen uptake. So as long as we see a need for it, we can target a research project to develop search information, or if we think and we get this information available somehow, we add the information to the software. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, Andre, another question from the audience is, for vegetable production in your area, do people correct the pH somehow solution in some way?
I'm sorry, Daniel, can you please repeat the question? Do people correct the pH?
The pH, CE, I think, is EC salinity, and in the solution, the component, the nutrient component in the circulating solutions for vegetables.
Okay, I'm looking right now in here at the Google chat, and looks like it's from Rodrigo Vieira. So, vocês utilizam. The question is, do we utilize extraction solutions from the soil through the lysimeters? I believe. And some people do, but the university does not support that. We don't have evidence that that's a sound method. We base our fertilizations on, or pH corrections based on soil samples or soil chemical analysis. One issue that we have with this lysimeter method is that you put the ceramic tip in the soil at a certain depth, and you extract that at a certain period of time on that very specific location in the field, with the fertilizer bin, with the plant rows, and with the within field variability, the spatial variability of the field, I think it's really hard to get a representative sample for the field and change your nutrient management. So most of our fields have high fertility, so I don't believe this method is applicable for the region.
Andre, there's a final question for you. I'm not sure whether I'm still having some audio problems, but the question is from Silvio, working in California with agriculture. How can Brazil improve irrigated agriculture?
So the first part of your question was compared to California's agriculture, how can Brazil improve irrigated?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, there are a few factors. I think integration with all the universities or universities who are doing similar work or applicable work to the region that I know Innovagri is doing a great job with. It's definitely a way to go, associating with the University of California, having good relationships with other universities who can share methods and project results and create ideas. I believe investing extension is another way of proceeding. There's definitely room for improving extension work in Brazil. Here in California, there is such a strong extension is such a strong component of the university. I think addressing those two main points, we'll get ahead. We'll get Brazil ahead for sure. Hello, Daniele. Hello, Daniele, are you back? I think you're on mute, Daniele.
I'm back. I had to restart everything because it froze. Sorry. Yeah. So
good.
I think I missed your answer, but did you answer the question on how irrigated agriculture in Brazil could be improved, given your experience in California agriculture?
I did. Mm-hmm.
All right. I think I don't have any more questions for you guys, and I think we are exceeded slightly the available time for this webinar, but I take the opportunity to thank you all for your excellent contribution and participation to this webinar. It is being recorded, so it's going to be available on YouTube, and thank you again for your time and effort and for sharing all your experience, expertise, and data with the audience of this Innovagri webinar. Thank you very much, and goodbye.